This is the Flyerdelphia podcast, presented by SportsTalkPhilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heenan. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome into another episode of the Flyerdelphia podcast, part of SportsTalkPhilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined once again by Rob Riches, and tonight we are taking a look at the Flyers kind of on the ends of two spectrums here. The Flyers had that 10-game losing streak that ran from mid-November through early December. One of the worst stretches of Flyers hockey we've really seen in some time. And then they come back out, go on the Western Canada trip and win 3 in a row out there. Then follow it up with 3 wins in a row at home now on part of a 5-game homestand. That's wins against Toronto, Buffalo, and a 2-1 overtime win over the Dallas Stars on Saturday night. So something to definitely keep an eye on as everything moves forward here. The Flyers going from a 10-game losing streak to a 6-game winning streak, and that's very quickly turned their season around in a bunch of different ways. It's just something where the Flyers, as you go through this season, it's a little... It's interesting, the progression here, because the Flyers were really a team that were down and out, not doing really much of anything that could get them to swing the game in their favor, to claim a win, always on the wrong side of the bounces. And this is a 6-game winning streak now that has the Flyers going back in the right direction, trending back in the right direction. It's really difficult to gauge just how you want to go about doing this and, you know, how you want to go about viewing the season, because it's hard to get enthused by a winning streak when you know that the team has also lost 10 games in a row. But you can't deny that what the Flyers are doing is still finding ways to win games, even if they're not playing their best hockey. Thursday night's game was a really good example of that, because that was against a Buffalo Sabres team that had a lot, certainly is trying to prove that they have a lot as a hockey team, but hasn't really shown much this season collectively, but really didn't play a poor game on Thursday by any stretch. We're very much a part of that game. So as I bring Rob in here, how do you look at these two different stretches here? The 10-game losing streak, the 6-game winning streak, the fact that the Flyers have kind of gone from one end where they were losing, can't find a way to win, to finding the way to get things done lately.
Yeah, it seems like we're at the point now where the Flyers are just becoming a very Jekyll and Hyde team of extremes, where you can't have any middle ground with them. It's either things just get really bad when they're losing, or things go really great and they start putting wins together. It's pretty crazy how these things work out. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but it'd be, how funny would it be if you have a team that loses 10 in a row and then wins their next 10 in a row? I don't think that's ever happened in the National Hockey League before. That's just it's almost remarkable in a sense, but it's kind of funny, because during that 10-game losing streak last year, when they did put 10 wins in a row. The drum that I was kind of beating was that it's one of those things. Yeah, they did get 10 wins, but 6 of those games or 6 of those wins were 1-goal games. And that's one of those things where any number of things could have happened that could have easily made that streak not last as long. And it's kind of similar when they lost 10 in a row just a few weeks ago. It seemed like we were just about ready to write the season off, where they were getting the points, which, the points are cool and all, but at the end of the day, you're still losing games. But there's still, a number of things that could have gone down, or they could have won. That losing streak couldn't have gone on as long as it did. So, it's one of those things where, they lose 10 in a row, then they're putting six in a row, 6 wins in a row together, and just getting to that, I mean, it seems like they're finding their way. They're playing a lot more confident now, and that's just what you want to see out of them.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think
it was Giroux, Claude Giroux. He told NBC Sports Philadelphia's Danny Pomel's after Saturday's win that they basically they had 1 or 2 beers and talked about what kind of club they wanted to be, which is officially my favorite Philadelphia sports quote of all time. But it's one of those things where they kind of had to find their way, and it looks like they're doing that right now.
Yeah, no question about it. And Giroux's really certainly been a leader of that in terms of just being around the play. He's definitely been a play driver in this stretch. He's having the season that everybody wants him to have, no question about it. I think a lot of Flyers are, really. If you look at the way that Giroux is playing, the way Couturier is playing, the way that Jake Voracek's playing. These are guys that are putting together seasons like they were expected to do over the course of several years. And last year in particular, these are numbers that just weren't there for a lot of guys. Giroux in particular, you just see something out of Giroux's game that's kind of got him back into that mode where he was. You can even go back 5 years ago and look at Giroux 5 years ago and say, this is the Claude Giroux that everybody wanted to see leading the team when he became the captain. And it's hard to put a full evaluation on everything because, like we said, you can't ignore a 10-game losing streak just because they have a 6-game winning streak. And to Rob's point, the NHL record for wins after a 10-game losing streak is 7. The Flyers are at 6. So they're coming up on possible history here. They got the LA Kings on Monday, and they've got the Detroit Red Wings on Wednesday, both at home also. And you're playing 5 straight games at home. You're giving yourself a chance to fight your way back into the playoff picture. And they have already when you think about it. But this isn't about just talking playoffs here because the Metropolitan Division is so competitive. The Eastern Conference is really just very competitive as a whole. But you want to see the play be driven in the right way. You want to see players like Giroux showing this kind of skill. And I do think, and I think this is a good thing for us to talk about, Rob, is that when you look at the recent successes that the Flyers have had, it was probably one of the best things they could have done, splitting up the trio of Giroux, Voracek, and Couturier, and finding a way to try to balance out some of the scoring, because it seems like now they have a very quality top 6 going. And I'm not trying to sit here and say that you are going to build your franchise at this stage of where you are as a franchise and the stage of where some of the players are. You want to build your franchise around a second line that features Valtteri Filppula and Michael Raffl. It's not to say that they don't belong there or that they aren't quality players still, but they're not building blocks toward the final destination probably. But I still look at them and I go, Voracek's presence has turned that trio around. Wayne Simmons going to the top line has fit in with Couturier and Giroux, and it hasn't done anything to change what those two have been doing consistently. And you get these groupings of players now that are all starting to be much better at driving the play. I think the fourth line still, even though you've kind of made some changes in that respect, Scott Lawton and Taylor Lear being together are definitely play drivers. Putting Konechny on a line like that is a pretty good idea. It's going to vary because you want to see players get minutes. There's no question about it. But I think the Flyers have much better line structure at the moment than they did during the grueling part of the 10-game losing streak. Is that your thought too, Rob?
Absolutely. It's something where, just the kind of the result that they've showed, I think, over this streak. I mean, it's one of those things where, anything's possible, and just the result that they've shown, and just coming out of Western Canada. I mean, that's something that's, it's obviously big any way you look at it. And I think one thing that's remarkable is the play of Brian Elliott. You had Michael Neuwirth going down. He's kind of being relied on to be the workhorse here. And that's something where, he's absolutely answered the bell. I don't think there's anything that you could really he's been playing. I don't want to say he's been playing out of his mind, but he really has been something else.
Yeah, no question about it. And, I think looking at Brian Elliott, I was very, very impressed with his game during the late parts of that losing streak too. Just because a perfect example is the game against Pittsburgh. This was at the time, you're trying to snap a 7-game losing streak, trying to avoid the 8th straight loss. You're in position to do so. And Elliott faced 52 shots in that game. Ended up giving up 5 goals in the 5-4 overtime loss. And you'll look at the numbers on paper and go, 5 goals is a ton to give up. But when you think about it, look at the firepower that Pittsburgh brings, and then you're going to sit there and say that this is an above average number of shots that a goalie faces in a game. You don't normally see, when you see a goalie's faced 50 shots or more, that's an effort that goes beyond words in some ways. So for him to be as good as he was for a good stretch of that, and you got to remember, Elliott had made a glove save on Sidney Crosby from the slot, from one of the most dangerous areas where you can leave Crosby available to take a shot. And it appeared to be a game saver with a minute 10 left in regulation. Now, ultimately, right off of the next faceoff, Pittsburgh scored a goal and tied the game. So I'm not going to sit here and act like that was the game. It was a game saver, and then they found that was in his time when they were finding ways to lose games. But I do view what Brian Elliott has done really from that point, because look at how many games he started over the course of a lot of this. He started 8 of the 10 games on the losing streak. He's now started all 6 of the games on the winning streak. When you're asking a goalie to start, a good number of these games here, this is 14 of 16 for him. Not to mention that at one point in time, he came in and played in relief of Neuvirth at a stretch too. So he's appeared in a lot of these games, and it's impressive to watch him handle the workload. The Flyers really did this, if we remember correctly, too. The Flyers did this on the 10-game winning streak they had a year ago, too. Steve Mason was in net for all of this, with the exception of a couple of games that Anthony Stolarz got. So it's really not a surprise that the Flyers are trying to find a way to roll with one goalie. It's more or less seeing Elliott handle the workload, be a number one guy. He had worked in the tandem for quite a while. So to see him handle the workload of a number one and perform like a number one, perform like a top netminder in the NHL would, that's an encouraging sign for where the Flyers are at the moment, knowing that they're waiting for the future franchise goalie to be ready for the call, whoever that may be and whenever that may be. Now, I'd look at some of this stretch also, though, and I mean, there's a lot of players we could talk about during this entire stretch. One guy at this point I think we really have to talk about on a regular basis anymore, and we have been, but I think we need to really put a focus on him, is Sean Couturier. Just because of the fact that Couturier has put up career numbers, and we're not even halfway through the year yet, and the fact that it's almost like it's a wonder what took so long to get him on the top line. And we know what took so long to get him on a line like that. It was the fact that the Flyers were so hardened in the way of saying Claude Giroux is the top line center. He's going to play top line minutes. He is still playing top line minutes, but the willingness of the Flyers to kind of rework the lines, it's one of the things that, and I know that during the 10-game losing streak, especially Dave Haxtell took a lot of flack for it, and people were calling for his head and all that stuff, and it was understandable because you had a sense that the team was not really in a frame of mind where you had a feeling he was losing them. And even though Ron Hextall came out and said that's not the case, that we're sticking together here, the whole thing, you had a sense that that's what was happening. And obviously a 6-game winning streak to follow to put yourself back in a playoff race a little bit certainly saves his job. But I do think I kind of admire what he's done with the line structure, at least the willingness to try to experiment with that. And that could be from discussions from within too. That could be something that Ron Hextall's thought of, but the willingness for the Flyers in general as an organization to kind of pull back on that hardened mindset that Giroux had to play on the top line and be the center and be a center constantly has opened up scoring opportunities for both Couturier and Giroux, and they're both having great years. That to me has been one of the moves from last season to this season that has made a world of difference. What do you think about that, Rob?
It's funny because when you think of Claude Giroux playing on the wing, you think that the only way that's possible is when he makes the Team Canada roster, for the World Cup of Hockey or the World Championship or something along those lines, where there's just so many decent Canadian centermen that there's kind of an embarrassment of riches. But, just the fact that it always just seemed like it was the inevitability that it was always Giroux is going to be the top line center. That's it, case closed. But obviously Haxtall's flexibility here and moving him to the wing, I mean, he's able because when you get to he's able to create so much more space for himself on the left side, and when you have Claude Giroux creating space for himself, that's a dangerous thing, and that's something where you have Couturier who a lot of the knock on him was because he's always there's no doubt about how good of his two-way game is or his defensive game, but people were always kind of waiting on him to take that next step offensively. And now that you put him up there on the top line with two dynamic playmakers in both Giroux and Jakub Voracek, that's something where that helps him open up his game and kind of tap into his offensive potential as well. And that's something that you definitely enjoy to see.
And the fact that it hasn't suffered with the change in line either, where Simmons goes to the top line and Voracek drops down to kind of bring out the secondary scoring a little bit more. That's another important factor. What I like about Couturier's game, and this is the thing to your point, Rob, where you knew about his two-way ability and you knew about, there was always the conversation that Couturier was going to be in the Selke conversation once he got his offensive upside to be what everybody thought was going to be out of his draft year. And now that you're seeing the upside a little bit more, you got a guy who is at 15 goals already, ties his career high. He's definitely probably going to – it would be impossible to imagine him not reaching 20 goals. 25 is in play at this point. Even pushing 30 is in play, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. And you just think, yeah, playing with the guys he's playing with, getting power play time with the guys he's playing with, 25's in range. It's within reach when you have 15
93.
and 30. What's that?
93.
93?
The all-time single-season record.
For what's that?
For goals of the season.
Oh, he's not going to get
that would be the record. Gretzky's got the all-time record with 92.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, but I don't know. That's probably a little bit out of reach for anybody.
I might be getting a little ahead of myself.
Yeah, I think you are. What is that going to be? Is that going to be Nolan Patrick's goal total next year? Because obviously we'll get into him a little bit later on too.
You got to get 76.
Okay.
The rookie record, right? To get the rookie record, yeah.
Well, that's going to be a little difficult probably at this stage, but
just a tad.
But back to Couturier, because
he scores like a hat trick every game from here on out, though.
Yeah. Well, he's got to see the ice enough times to do that too. But back to Couturier, because just to see him within reach of bigger numbers than that, I think that everybody from his rookie year, even because he had decent numbers as a rookie, and he was able to put up some decent goal numbers in the past. I think everybody thought he had the potential to be a 20 goal scorer for sure. And probably you want to expect more than that out of a guy who was drafted as high as he was. But beside that, it's just good to see him coming into his own in that first line, or at least that combination of Giroux on the left wing, Couturier up the middle on the top line. To see that stand through, now we're up to 32 games into the year at this point. That's really an encouraging sign. And then, like I said, to not be afraid to break up the top line when it was the last thing that you could try to break up the losing streak, to watch it start to work out, to see Raffl getting some offense, to see Filppula getting some offense, and because of Voracek's presence on their line, and then to see that it hasn't affected the top line any, and it's really brought out the best in the bottom six in a way, because of the fact that anything the bottom six does is kind of gravy from here. So it's excellent. It's really nice to see more balance in the scoring, and then to go into everything there. So let's take a short pause for a second here. We're going to pause and come back. And when we come back, let's get into Nolan Patrick a little bit, because Nolan Patrick is an interesting topic of conversation. And certainly with the World Juniors right around the corner here, coming up in a little more than a week, something that we certainly want to talk about. So we'll be right back on the Flyerdelphia podcast.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia podcast, and after talking about some of the balance and scoring that's helped the Flyers get back to a 6-game winning streak, one player we do want to talk about who hasn't really factored into the scoring as much, that definitely had a lot of hopes and people were certainly interested in seeing him, is Nolan Patrick. And while there's an emphasis on Patrick getting adjusted to the NHL level, this time of year can bring out a lot of discussion because of the fact that Nolan Patrick, being so young, being eligible for junior still, does make a difference. And it's something where you can look at Nolan Patrick and say, would it have been beneficial for him to be sent to the World Junior Championship tournament and see if playing alongside kids of his age would help bring some of his scoring touch back, get his confidence up. It was something to be discussed. It never really made it further than that, though, as just a thought, because Ron Hextall quickly said that's not in the plan. They weren't sending him back to be part of the tournament. He's going to stay with the Flyers. He's going to try to play regularly. But you saw his minutes take a hit at times, and it was really a big question as to what are you trying to do with this kid? How is it going to affect him moving forward? He's a rookie. He's trying to get everything together here. You want to see him build some confidence at the NHL level, but it's hard to do that when you're not seeing the ice, especially in the key situations. Hackstall has kind of come around a little bit on that. I've seen he's playing a little bit more in the third period than we've seen in games past, which is always a good sign. But you want to see that start to build a little bit. And so my thinking here is you're starting to see him get the minutes. Now let's see what he can do to generate some offense and try to be much more of a presence there. I personally haven't had any problem with his two-way play. He's made some mistakes as a rookie, will make, no question about it. And a lot of them are on his thinking, probably being a little ahead of some people. He's trying to make passes where he thinks he's going to be making the right play, and it can turn into an odd man rush in transition, which has led to some goals in the past. It's something where you got to be careful about and be mindful of how quickly a mistake can turn into a goal. And that's something that he'll learn as a rookie. But otherwise, his play away from the puck has not been a problem for me. It's been, obviously we're 32 games into his rookie season. He hasn't played in all of them with the concussion history. He ended up missing a good stretch of time there. So let's not forget that he's probably about, he still hasn't crossed the 25 game mark yet. But to have 2 goals and 4 assists and be at 6 points at this stage of the season, yeah, I think people were expecting a little bit more offensively. Rob, what's your kind of evaluation on Nolan Patrick to this point in the year and where he's been? Because obviously Nolan Patrick is the focal point of some of the rookies on this team, and we can talk about some of the other rookies a little bit on down in this segment, but Nolan Patrick has been a topic of discussion just because of the fact that minutes seem like they were limited at times, and the offense is obviously not really there yet, and people are worried about his confidence and a lot of things like that.
Yeah, I think it's something where when you look at Patrick, it's just the adjustment. I think he's still getting used to playing against men every night. Making that jump from the junior stage up to the NHL level, and that's something where we haven't exactly seen that be a problem for a lot of these younger guys, these top draft picks. But that's something where everybody's still different. Cases are still different on each individual basis, and that's something where if you let Patrick get those opportunities in the third period, let him try to, it's almost like he's thinking too much a little bit. You kind of just want him to focus on his game and just focus on what he can provide. I mean, it's something where it's a little slow, but it's one of those things where he's still growing, he's still developing, and there's still a lot that he can do.
Do you think, Rob? Do you think like this is a case for him where I want to, because I'll bring another rookie into the mix with this. Travis Sanheim had said after Thursday's game that now that he got his first NHL goal, it was kind of one of those things where you realize how difficult it can be to score in this league. Just like it was when you make a jump from juniors to the AHL and you start playing professionally. Sanheim had the benefit of going from juniors to AHL to NHL to see the progression of just being a professional first and then being an NHL player. In Patrick's case, he didn't have that. So is this even more of a learning curve for him just because of the fact that you look at what he has to adjust to from being a junior player last year to being an NHL player this year? Not to mention, we'll bring it up too, injuries being a thing too, because he played hurt in his draft year while in juniors. He had to undergo the surgery leading into the season. He didn't get the full off season of training. All of those things are factors. And if that's all the contributing factors to this, maybe a bit of a slow start to his career, are we just looking for him to eventually turn the corner as he finds himself healthier and more adjusted to the game? Is that just kind of the thing with it?
Absolutely, yeah. He's still just getting used to the hang of things. It's easy to look at what Nico Shear's doing up in New Jersey. I think at this point he's got 5 goals and 20 points, so he's off to a good start. But I mean, the Devils are one of those teams where nobody really expected them to be doing so well at this point in the season. So that's certainly a factor in his success as well. But the fact that these are 2 completely different players, playing 2 completely different styles of games, it's something where there's that adjustment that Patrick's still looking to make, and it's a lot of guys, they handle that adjustment differently. It's not something that can be handled overnight. It's something that could take a little bit more time, and that's what it's looking like in Patrick's case. But at some point, he will turn the corner, and he'll grow a little bit more confident in his game. He'll get healthier, and just focus on that, and just being able to produce.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's a big thing. And if you're going to try to compare Hischier's case to Patrick's case, if this was role reversal and Nolan Patrick was asked to play the minutes that Hischier's playing, Hischier got thrown right into a situation where he was able to kind of take over almost top line situation very quickly. And that was just because of the way that the Devils roster shook out. And, as soon as really, it wasn't just the way the roster shook out, but as soon as Travis Zajac went down with an injury that was going to keep him out for months at that point, you had a reason for Hischier to get extended minutes. And he didn't have to deal with an off-season surgery where he was trying to recover. He didn't have to, I'm not saying he didn't have to go through an adjustment process, but I think the thing with Hischier is that the adjustment process happened kind of at the same pace as Nolan Patrick's did in the first couple weeks of the season. They both were around the same number of goals scored early on. Hischier was definitely setting guys up a little bit more. And again, you're playing in much higher impact situations, and that comes into play when you play extended minutes. But I look at the comparison of the two, and I go, if Nolan Patrick was playing for the Devils, coming off of the same kind of surgery he probably needed to have, and still trying to get adjusted to that, it's a surgery that does a lot. And I think the encouraging thing with that type of surgery being needed is that while this year it looks like it's a struggle for him, it looks like not only is he adjusting to the game, but he's also trying to deal with it while not being 100%. You have to look at how guys like Claude Giroux and Shayne Gostisbehere have had this same type of surgery done before. And while maybe it didn't help them last season, it certainly looks like it's helping them this season. So maybe as the year winds down and you'll start to see him turn a corner even more. It just kind of is. I don't want to say, it's not that it's disappointing, because it's year one and the kid, and he's a teenager still, so it's hard to fault the kid for anything. The problem is just that you want somebody to electrify the crowd a little bit from a forward standpoint, and you don't have a ton of rookie forwards here. Like, your rookie presence was on the back end as much as it was up front. So you had Robert Hägg, Travis Sanheim, Sam Morin for a brief period getting into games as rookies on the back end. Up front, it's more or less, it was Nolan Patrick, Taylor Lear, and that's the extent of things. And Taylor Lear's not in that situation. That's not the role he's playing here. And Taylor Lear, to me, just like Scott Laughton, very good at the role he's asked to play. When you put them together and say, go be energy drivers, go try to make something happen as fourth line guys, I think they're very good at what they have to do. But it's different in Patrick's case. Nolan Patrick came into this league as a high profile guy where people expected scoring and people expected dynamic plays, and he's kind of still trying to get adjusted to everything because of the fact that you had one injury from the offseason where he had to have a major surgery done, that you sit there and you go, takes time for you to get really completely back to normal. And then he had the concussion as well. So you're thinking a lot of different things with Nolan Patrick. Now, I want to switch gears on this then and go from Nolan Patrick, the rookie discussion, to Travis Sanheim, the rookie discussion, because Rob, you were at Thursday's game covering for us, and to get to see Travis Sanheim score his first NHL goal, first of all, stuff like that is always fun when you get to see it, just because it's a feel-good moment. Pretty nice shot, too, wouldn't you say?
No doubt about that. And that's something where, to get that marker, I mean, it's one of those things where you're more or less looking to, and obviously as a defenseman, you're not expected to score as much as you are up front, but that's a given. But it's one of those things where, when you go that long without doing it, I mean, it's something where, once you finally get that, you feel like the monkey's off your back, and that's something where, that'll help Sanheim grow. He finally got it, finally got that taken care of, finally got that all squared away, and it just to see a moment like, I mean, for him to and like you said, I mean, it was a very nice shot, and that's something where, there's still great things coming for him, and they're going to pick up now that he's finally on the board.
The pass that he got on that goal reminded me a lot of Ivan Provorov's first goal. It's a good play to give him space to be able to try to make something happen like that. Provorov got the same thing last year when he scored his first NHL goal, and that was a ways down the road too. I mean, that didn't happen overnight by any stretch. He had to really become accustomed with being a big presence defensively first and get used to being a big defenseman and playing his role in the defensive zone before he could step up in the offensive zone. But same kind of situation. He jumps into the play. He gets a good pass. You get the space to be able to try to do something with it, and you find a way to score a goal. I looked at Sanheim's game, especially with the way that play went on Thursday, and I kind of attributed that to Radko Gudas being back in the lineup. Because to me, once Gudas returned from his suspension, you had Sanheim being able to be that kind of free-range defenseman where he's able to jump into the play a little bit more. He takes on more of a Shayne Gostisbehere approach when he's got Gudas with him as opposed to being alongside Brandon Manning or being alongside for the number of games that he had to play alongside of Mark Alt too. You're talking about it at that point in time. You got to be a little bit more cautious because at that point in time, you just don't want it to be a line with deficiencies. You don't want it to be a line or a pairing that's subject to mistakes and being scored on, and you want to focus more on your defensive play. It all makes sense. But now that Gudas is back and he's got a veteran presence with him like that and is able to put some focus on jumping into the play, I thought he did a really nice job of it and recognizing situations. Was that present in the game that you saw on Thursday? It seemed like it wasn't as much in Saturday's game against Dallas that I was at, but to look at both games and see him jump into the play on occasion one game, but be willing to stay back because it was what the situation called for in a different game, he's getting a lot better at reading the situation, I think.
Absolutely, and that's something that's just an absolute thrill to watch him pick that up. That's the sense that it's it's one of those things you can't exactly teach. I mean, it's up to each guy to kind of pick that up. And I think another great thing about that goal he scored, another point I want to touch on with that is the context in which the goal was scored. Because obviously, it's in the first period. You don't think much of it, but then when you look at the context, I mean, it was a great response because Ryan O'Reilly opened the scoring minute 29 into that game. The Flyers found themselves down early, and it's one of those things where it was a bit of a slow start, but you had Sanheim who pretty much he was able to stay cool, and he was able to get them on the board and kind of lead the way from there.
Yeah, and actually to bring the conversation kind of full circle, it wasn't much. It was almost immediately after Nolan Patrick saved a goal down the other end. Right. On a similar play to the first Buffalo goal where just a turnover behind the net with your goalie trying to handle the puck, and next thing you know, they're trying to score on an empty net, and a heads-up play by Patrick saved a goal, and they got down the other end, and Sanheim's the one on the end of scoring. Defensemen have really been a big factor in that too, because if you look at Sanheim's goal on Thursday, Shayne Gostisbehere had a game that kind of brought us all back to his rookie season on Saturday. I know for me it did, because the first thing I likened Saturday's game to for Shayne Gostisbehere was a game in his rookie year, and obviously in Ghost rookie year, the Flyers made the playoffs out of that year too. But when he had a game in March against Tampa Bay that year where he was already riding the successes of just everything. He had already had he had the 4 game winners already. He had, or 4 overtime winners, I should say, by that point. He had the 15 game point streak. So he's at the top of the focus in his rookie year at this point, or the abbreviated rookie year, really, because he didn't really come on until November. So he's at the top of his game at this point and the focus of his rookie year. And the Flyers are just doing everything in that game but scoring on Tampa. And it's kind of ironic to look at it now because at the time, Tampa had played Vasilevsky in goal for that game, and Vasilevsky was still viewed as the backup at the time. So now you're looking at their now starter who helped at least get them off to such a tremendous start to the season in the NHL. And Flyers are doing everything but scoring, it feels like, in that game. And it's getting late in the second period, and Gostisbehere scored a goal that was very, very similar to his first goal on Saturday. It's something where the puck just ends up getting right off to the side of the net, right in the same area on the doorstep. And it's Gostisbehere, the defenseman, who's jumping up on the play a little bit more, getting more aggressive with it, sees the opportunity, kind of almost sneaks into a sense, because you got guys who are trying to track the puck and unable to do so. And so he's able to sneak in there and kind of just find a way to score the goal. And that's the one that gets it tied. Now, the overtime goal, to me, just everything takes me back to the rookie year also, because you go back to all the game winners he scored. Two of those game winners had come on the power play. And then to watch him go in and score on the power play here, it wasn't, let's just say, was it the prettiest of goals? Absolutely not. It was actually a low shot that he used, placed perfectly, really, because of the fact that Ben Bishop had lost his stick, was kind of wrestling and playing tug of war with Wayne Simmons in front of that to try to get a stick, which I still, to be honest with you, I have no idea what he was trying to get out of that. And Gostisbehere goes in and scores, and then just does that kind of cut to the left where he spins away from the play and starts to celebrate. And that was just so reminiscent of one of the goals he had scored against Carolina in overtime, while at the 3-on-3. That was his third of his rookie year. It just brought back everything. Like, you kind of started to think about it, and then you think about Gostisbehere's year collectively. He's at 6 goals on the season now, following the 2 on Saturday. Well, that's 1 short of what he had last season, while he was plagued by the recovery from his injury and things like that. And again, we're talking 32 games into the season, so he's on pace for the double-digit goal year, and he's putting up points like he used to, and everything really matches up well there. So you're seeing another player who overcame the injury, turned things around, and started and is part of this young core. Especially, to me, Gostisbehere is more part of the young core than a lot of the other defensemen. Not trying to take away from Ivan Provorov, like, by any means, because Provorov is clearly the number one on this team. It's Gostisbehere is the one he's the first to have made the NHL, and he's also the first now of this grouping of young players who got a major contract extension, who was given a contract that indicated you're part of the future. So I look at that and I'm seeing him come around. It's been great to watch him have the turnaround, just because during the losing streak, it was hard to find somebody who was more frustrated than he was. He really lost his composure a couple times during all of that, and he's bounced back from it very nicely since things have started to turn back around. What's your assessment, Rob?
I think the thing about Gostisbehere, I mean, it is great to see him kind of bouncing back this year. And, quick shameless plug, he did have that charity function on Friday night, which by all accounts looked like a good time. I couldn't be there, unfortunately. It's not often I could say that when something involves the Philadelphia Flyers and beer that I can't be there, but it's something where he had the charity event for his new Gostisbehere Foundation. Then he goes out and scores 2 goals against Dallas. So that's something that you like to see from him. But when he had that electrifying rookie year a couple of years back and got jobbed out of the Calder, which I'm still not bitter about at all. Not the slightest. I don't know why you would ever suggest that, but it's something where coming into last year and battling injury and just being healthy, scratched out of the lineup, and just struggling overall a little bit. I mean, it's something where, he had that year. It was like he set the bar a little too high for himself, I thought. And it's something where, now he's able to shake that. It's a different year for him now. And he's able to learn from that, learn from those struggles, and really kind of tune his game around that. So that's something where, he's obviously, he's learned from, what went wrong. And obviously, I think that's one of the best benchmarks for a player is, that they're willing to learn and grow their game like that, the way that he has. So he's having fun out there, and it shows, and it's absolutely just it's fun to watch.
Well, first of all, to counter your point, the foundation event did look like a blast. I thought about it myself. I didn't end up being in a position where I was ready to actually attend the event.
There was snow.
That's the thing. I was thinking about it. I didn't end up being ready for it anyway, and luckily I didn't, because I don't think I would have made it there anyway with the way the weather was. But still, nonetheless, he's coming back with a good year, and at least by the numbers, he's on pace for it. The rookie year, the problem with the rookie year is that let's not lie about what the numbers showed for Gostisbehere in that rookie year. he looked like he put up numbers that Mark Howe would be expected to put up, and it's like you don't compete with a Hall of Famer in your rookie year. You have to build on that a little bit. And it all went so well for him in that rookie year that the follow-up year, off of needing an off-season surgery, off of all the successes, wasn't very good. And at this point in time, it's nice to be able to just see him show signs of that, and it's shades of the rookie year. No one's asking him to put up 17 goals a year. That's pretty ridiculous among defensemen at the NHL level anymore in today's NHL, unless you're Brent Burns, somebody of that nature. Even Erik Karlsson, who in my opinion is among the best, should always be a Norris Trophy candidate, no question about it. Is not the biggest goal scorer, but he's always around the puck. He's always strong in his own zone and then puts up points, but he sets up a lot of guys. You get, I don't think you're asking for Gostisbehere to be a 20-goal scorer at all. You're asking for him to be a guy who helps drive the play, be a power play guy, be a guy who's always present in the offensive skill set that he has. And that's where, I don't even think you're asking Gostisbehere to be the type of guy who gets into the Norris running, because defensively is not going to be his strongest suit. You're going to have, and when I say that, I don't mean that he's been bad in that department. I say that because you're not going to rely on him as your number one defenseman. That's, we see that out of Ivan Provorov because of the fact that Provorov gets down in his blocking shots and doing things like a penalty killer in the clutch moments and doing those things, and has the ability to move the puck like an offensive-minded defenseman and can shoot well and does a lot of things with, the hockey smarts that make you such a hot commodity in an NHL draft. That all applies. I look at Gostisbehere and I just see a guy who's turned his game back around the right way by trying to just go back to basics a little bit and get the puck toward the net in situations. That, to me, that game-winning goal in overtime on Saturday was nothing more than, I'm just going to try to get the puck on the net because the goalie doesn't have a stick right now. And it worked out perfectly. That, not to mention, like, let's say Bishop makes that save on Gostisbehere in overtime because he's thrown there. Well, he threw it along the ice. Chances are it's going to be tough for you to stop that without allowing a rebound. You had Simmons at the front of the net. You had Giroux and Voracek out there. Giroux was kind of in a situation where he could have probably cut to the net quickly. They've got guys who are around the net, and you're taking a chance there. It's perfect. It was really a well-done, well-executed play on the power play, quickly done to take advantage of the situation, and that's what they have to do. So I'm very impressed with the way he's turned his season around, and a whole lot of things about his game that were lacking at times earlier this season, definitely lacking last year, in the way that he's been able to recover. So let's take another short pause here. And when we come back on the Flyerdelphia podcast, we start to turn the corner to next week a little bit, start to look forward a little bit, and realistically not only look at the next 4 that are on the Flyer schedule in the next week, but also the rest of the games for the calendar year. 2017 is coming to a close very quickly here. We're going to start to look ahead to the final games of that calendar year of 2017 as the Flyers get ready for 2018 and a possible, certainly more possible than it was 2 weeks ago, a possible playoff push. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Flyerdelphia podcast.
You're listening to the Flyerdelphia podcast with Kevin, Rob, and Dan on SportsTalkPhilly.com.
Back here on the Flyerdelphia podcast, and as we enter our final segment of the show, we start to turn the corner and look forward here. And the Flyers, coming off of their 6th straight win, we just talked about went in depth on Shayne Gostisbehere's involvement in that 2-1 win for the 6th straight for the Flyers. The game against Dallas on Saturday night. We look ahead to what's left, and I think the first thing we should do in looking ahead is focus on what's left of the homestand that they have, the 5-game homestand, because coming into this homestand, being better at home was a big issue for the Flyers. You looked at the way they started the year off with really two wins that were as good as they get on home ice to start with. between the home opener against Washington, the 8-2 blowout, then they won 5-1 against Florida. They did lose against Nashville on home ice in their third home game, but then that was only a 1-0 game, really tough, tight checking, not a lot of room to do much with at all. Then you go to their next game against Edmonton. They won that one down the stretch again. It was a late game goal that helped put them ahead for good. So from there, though, after winning 3 of the first 4, they really struggled. They lost to Anaheim badly. They lost in overtime to Arizona. They lost in a shootout to Colorado. They got a win against Chicago that was good. And then from there, that was when the losing streak started. And the losing streak was not snapped until they went on the road to Western Canada. So to come back here and get 3 wins to open things up kind of starts to balance things out for where wins were coming from. It was, don't get me wrong, I think it's great that they started showing some signs of being able to finish off games on the road as they have this season, but now you're seeing it at home again where they've been doing so well. But these next 2 games are going to be kind of very similar to the Toronto Buffalo lineup that they had earlier this week. You're going to get a really tough game on Monday when they play the LA Kings, and then you're going to get a team that's further below in the standings that you have to try to find a way to win a game against, because you don't want to make this one of those situations where you were bested by a team that maybe you feel like is one that you would play down to, we'll call it. So looking ahead, Rob, what can we kind of look for out of these last 2 games, these the whole week really, and we're getting closer to the year being over too, so 6 games left for the Flyers in 2017. What is left to look forward to as we get down the stretch of these games in the month of December, first on the homestand, then going on the road for 4 games and having to finish off the calendar year?
Well, starting off that Monday night game against the LA Kings, that's something where that brings John Stevens back to Wells Fargo Center behind the Kings bench. He's been getting the Kings off to a pretty decent year so far. Anze Kopitar is having an absolutely incredible season. I call it a bounce back season of sorts for him. Last year, it almost suggested a possible decline for him, but he's been on an absolute tear this season. And you remember it was the second game of the season where the Kings actually shut the Flyers out 2-0 out at Staples Center. So that's the part where they wrap up their season series. So that should be a fun one to watch. I'm very much looking forward to that one. And then games against the Red Wings and the Sabres to close out the homestand. That's something where obviously the Red Wings having a little bit of a tougher go. I remember. You remember last year, just like the Flyers, they didn't make the playoffs, which almost felt wrong. Watching the Stanley Cup playoffs without the Red Wings was just strange. I mean, that's something I've never seen before. Kevin. I mean, it always seemed like it was death taxes in the Red Wings in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they're going through a rough stretch of their own, and then. Another game against the Sabres to wrap up, or to close out the homestand against the Red Wings. Then they play another game against the Sabres. It's 2 games in a week, almost getting ready to close out that season series. And then, they take on the Blue Jackets, and that's the last game before the Christmas break.
Yeah, it really isn't. Well, first of all, because you mentioned John Stevens is going to return with the Kings on Monday night, it's going to be the second straight Flyers home game where a former Flyers coach is behind the opposing bench, with Ken Hitchcock being in with Dallas.
That's correct.
On Saturday night. So that's an interesting little tie in there. What John Stevens has done with LA has really been impressive, because they've been one of the best teams in the Western Conference all year. Anze Kopitar is having an MVP season right now. I mean, I don't know that he is the far and away league MVP, but he's putting up numbers that are ridiculous, and he always seems to be around the scoring. And you got to factor in that that's a team that's had to play a long stretch without Jeff Carter, a guy who is really at the center of the scoring for that team. Was one of the guys who, if actually going back to last year and bringing up last season, when the Kings returned to Philadelphia to play their one meeting in Philly, it was Jeff Carter who scored the only goal of that game in overtime. And it's not something that's going to happen now, because Carter is still out of the lineup at the moment. But you have a lot of guys who have stepped up in his place, kind of to make that team better, to make that team kind of. I'm not going to sit here and say that they are far and away like on their way to something big in the playoffs, but being in a playoff position and being led by guys, Drew Doughty's obviously big on the blue line, but being led by guys, Kopitar's had a really good year, but to see Dustin Brown really at the center of a lot of big plays, he's having a good year coming back from it, things like that. So you got a lot of guys who have been not want to say forgotten, but you were starting to think that the LA success was starting to fade away a little bit with all the changes they were making. And they've come back with a lot of the same guys, quite honestly, and played the part of one of the best teams in the Western Conference and in the NHL so far, no question about it. Detroit's on their way to another one of those years, I think. You just watch Detroit. And like you said, Rob, it's weird. It's weird to think of them not as a playoff team, but you see how far off they are in points, and this is a team that just I struggle with them because of the fact that nobody jumps out to me as a superstar player for them. Once Datsuk left, that really kind of derailed that. Zetterberg's still good, but he's older. He's obviously kind of on the downswing of things. Really, the biggest names they've got are, Franz Nielsen's one of the bigger guys. He was their all-star representative last year, and that's kind of the extent of it. There's not a whole lot of guys they've got that jump out at you as big-time, big-name players. So
other than
that'll
guys
be
like
interesting.
Gus Nyquist, Andreas Athanasiou, the young guy Dylan Larkin.
Yeah, Larkin's probably the closest thing they've got to a future star, and he's not blowing anybody away in terms of like the point totals. Every team's got that guy. Right now, somebody who usually by this point in the year, somebody who's broken the 30-point mark in some way, and even looking at Buffalo when they came in. Buffalo's a lowly team at this point. There's not a lot going for them, but you don't ignore a talent like Jack Eichel. Because he was a second overall pick and because people know what his capabilities are. So you don't ignore him. That's the thing. It doesn't mean that he's going to go out there and put up points every night. To me, Larkin's the closest thing they have. And to look at the Flyer side of things and see Jake Voracek as the team leader with 40 points and Larkin's at the top of the list for Detroit with 24, that's a big differential here, and the Flyers have got players who have obviously been playing at the point per game pace, and Detroit doesn't right now. And you'll have to see what that turns into. I think that's just one of those games where you want to make sure that you don't get into any bad habits and make mistakes and do things that allow this team to hang around. The only reason, let's be real, the only reason that the game against Buffalo was a 1-goal game was because of a mistake. It was a turnover behind the net that helped set up the first goal, and it could have been worse. So the mistakes, it's all about making mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you've got a chance to win against anybody usually. I think that was a big key to the win against Dallas. Look at how many times Dallas was sent to the penalty box in the last 2 periods. The Flyers didn't take a penalty after the first period. Those kind of things, discipline, mistakes, it all comes into play. To get a game like that to close out the homestand and then to start a road trip with Buffalo, to me, really is a big chance for points. But you have to do the same thing. It's avoiding playing down to the opponent. And the Flyers, to me, just haven't had really, really good games in Buffalo in recent years. They may have been able to win a game against Buffalo at home, but on the road, they've really struggled at times, and that worries me a little bit. The Columbus game is one of those games where I look at that and I go on the back end of a back-to-back, no less. I want to see. That's a game where I want to see what the Flyers have in them, because that's a team that, Columbus is a team that could be leading in the Metropolitan Division. There are times this year where they have been. They're currently tied for second. It could go a lot of different ways, and by the time this matchup comes up, by the end of the week here, you're not sure. We won't be sure where they are in the standings because the Metropolitan Division is that tight. It's so close at this point that positions are changing literally by minute, it feels like sometimes, that when all these teams are playing on the same night, you could have somebody in first when the early game start at 7, and by 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, somebody else has moved into a different position. So all of that comes into play. And then, again, a back-to-back to end the calendar year of 2017 the following week against Florida and Tampa Bay. We'll obviously try to be back on, and we'll have a show before then as well to talk about a little bit more of that. But just looking ahead to that and seeing that you got 6 games left, you just want to make a good impression. You just want to make sure that you finish the year on a high note. They've come back so well over the course of this winning streak to put themselves in a position where they aren't one of those teams that's scraping the bottom anymore like they were not too long ago. They're not chasing as many teams to get into the playoffs as they were. That's another big factor. You look at the Rangers and the Islanders are tied with 39 points and have played 33 games. So the Flyers have a game in hand on those two teams at 4 points behind them. They have 2 in hand on Pittsburgh, who is the one team in front of them in the standings that is out of the playoff picture at the moment at 37 points. And like we said, so that's 2 games in hand. So you've got ways to get back in this thing where you'll be able to pull into either a tie for that playoff spot, perhaps, things like that. You definitely have a shot to be right on the playoff picture and on the bubble of being in the playoffs as the calendar year ends. And that would be a great recovery because people use Thanksgiving as a marker, and the Flyers were on their way, just tail spinning. It was just straight downhill. And now you're seeing them start to work their way back up to the right end of it, being the bubble team. This isn't about them being 8 points off of the division lead or 6 points off of one of the guaranteed spots in the top 3 of the division or anything like that. This is more or less just putting the attention on how close they are to being in the playoffs and being in a position where realistically everybody had them to begin with. They were one of those bubble teams. Here they are in a situation where they are on the bubble again, looking at a possibility of being there. And that's all you can ask for at this point, especially when you look at how they fared for 10 games in a row. To sit there and go 10 games in a row, the most they could get is a point at a time during a stretch of 10 games. And they managed to get five games of the 10 that they lost in a row to overtime. So they got 5 points over the course of 10 games. Now they've played 6 games and picked up 12 points, and it's really pulled them back into a situation where they were right in Buffalo, Florida, Ottawa territory, and now they're back up with Pittsburgh, the Islanders, the Rangers, teams like that, and still definitely in the discussion as this stretch hits. So we will see kind of where that goes and turns into the new year and things like that. So, Rob, you got anything else for us? Any final thoughts before we wrap things up for the week?
2 things. Yeah, let's not forget how tight that Metro division is. It is a very tough division. It's probably the toughest division in hockey right now. So that's something where, the Flyers, I mean, they're only 8 points, 8 points. Yeah, I can actually do math. 8 points behind Washington for the division lead. So that's something where, as much as they struggled and as much as they tried to recuperate from that, it's still a tight division and anything is still possible. They can get to that bubble marker. And Kevin, if you may remember correctly, we did a podcast along with Dan back in around the start of the season. It was our season preview, and I said that Oscar Lindblom would be on this team by December 19th. It's looking like I have it written down right here. It's looking like that's something I could be wrong about.
In fairness to you, I actually should think of this as kind of almost ironic in a way, because I believe that I wrote down either November 18th, the game against Calgary, or the Black Friday game as ones to watch for Lindblom. And Danik Martel made his NHL debut on the 22nd of November in a spot where they could have potentially called up Lindblom. So I was close on the time frame where they needed a forward, had the wrong forward. So, and shout out, since we're mentioning Danik Martel too, by the way, to go off of that, him not missing a beat at the AHL level. He's since returned and been playing there consistently since going back. But he still has the AHL league lead in goals, even after spending, a good week and a half out of the league. So credit to him for still putting everything together. And Lindblom's been better in the AHL level as well, so that's all good things to notice. I do want to echo Rob's thoughts on the Metropolitan Division, because it's just crazy. And to think, one of the things that I find very important with this is the number of games that the Flyers have played against teams within their own division. They opened their home schedule against Washington. That was the first game they played against anybody in the Eastern Conference. And then they did not play a division opponent again until they played the Islanders on November 22nd. They played a couple different games against Eastern Conference teams, but they were all Atlantic teams, Florida, Ottawa, Toronto. And then finally playing the Islanders in a home and home. They played Pittsburgh. And again, that's it from the Metropolitan Division throughout. They've played 4 games out of their 32 this year against teams in the Metropolitan Division. For perspective, and I can't take credit for this. I saw Dave Isaac, I think, tweeted this out yesterday during the game. But Dallas was finishing up a 4-game road trip in 6 days, all against Metropolitan Division opponents. So the Dallas Stars in the other conference, in the Western Conference, have played as many games literally this week against Metropolitan Division opponents as the Flyers have in 32 games this season, and they play in that division. So they'll get Columbus on Saturday as another one. That'll bring it to 5, but that's it. They'll have played 5 games against the Metropolitan Division going into the new year, and they get to open it right back up again with Pittsburgh and the Islanders. Both on home ice. So to think about that and to look at that and go, that'll be the chance where the Flyers can collectively try to make something out of this division. It's hard, not say it's hard to do, but you want to look at it and go, you can't gauge where you would really rank in this division sometimes without playing each other. That's where the balance comes from. That's where points are gained and lost, and truly there are 4-point games. So to watch the Flyers go out and win a game like they did on Saturday against Dallas, in a game where getting it to overtime does not matter, because it doesn't matter that you're giving up the point to a Western Conference opponent. That's where it's all good. These are the games that they'll have to finish out in regulation, and it's a good sign for them to have watched them play Toronto the way they did and Buffalo the way they did and finish those games in regulation to try to start a trend in that direction. You want to be that kind of team. And that's important with teams like Pittsburgh, the Islanders. Hard to believe that we're saying this, but the first meeting with the Rangers comes in January. The first meeting with the Devils will come in that month. They'll actually play 2 against the Devils in January. They have Washington twice in that month. You're going to get a healthy dose of the Metropolitan Division in January. And it'll be really exciting to see where this team lines up, because they have really, in my opinion, they have played teams against teams in their own conference very well and very tough. The real lacking games aside, hold for the 3-0 loss to Boston a couple weeks back. Most of their games that you want to forget about, that you would scrap the tape on kind of, have been against Western Conference teams. So that's important moving forward, and we'll certainly see how it shakes out. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyerdelphia podcast. We want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Google Play, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll definitely want to do that too. On the YouTube channel, not only do we post the podcast, we also throw up some video recaps. We're going to try to start doing some things live on Facebook as well, leading into some of the road games. We're trying to focus on all that. We're testing some stuff out, trying to be connected with our listeners, our viewing audience, our readers, everything like that. So we want to make sure we do all of that. We'll be back sometime next week. We don't want to put a date on it just yet. We will, like the NHL, be taking a pause over the weekend of Christmas. So we have a couple games. The Flyers have a couple games on Friday and Saturday leading into the weekend. We'll obviously take off on the Sunday and Monday, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, just as the players do. And we'll probably start to preview the last week of the season in 2017 and moving ahead to 2018, right around the time that will come back, when the teams will come back to reconvene for practices and all of that. So it should be an exciting down the stretch kind of time here, and we are very excited for that. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in and listening. For Rob Riches, I'm Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia podcast on sportstalkphilly.com.
This has been another edition of the Flyerdelphia podcast with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heenan, presented by sportstalkphilly.com.